Question 1. Governance review demonstrates that Teva Pharmaceutical Industries is implementing a new global pharmacovigilance data management system. To ensure immediate operational readiness and cost efficiency, the project team proposes to deploy the system across all regions and then initiate the formal validation and regulatory submission process. What is the most appropriate approach to ensure compliance with the relevant regulatory framework for this critical system? Option A. Deploy the system immediately across all regions to gather real-world data, followed by a retrospective validation and submission. Option B. Conduct comprehensive validation and obtain regulatory approval for the system in key markets before initiating a phased global rollout. Option C. Focus on rapid deployment to achieve cost savings, with validation activities to be completed as resources become available in the subsequent fiscal year. Option D. Prioritize internal user acceptance testing and proceed with full deployment, assuming regulatory bodies will accept the system post-implementation. Correct answer is B. Conduct comprehensive validation and obtain regulatory approval for the system in key markets before initiating a phased global rollout. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Teva Pharmaceutical Industries, as a global entity, must navigate complex and potentially conflicting regulatory landscapes. The core challenge lies in ensuring that the implementation of a new pharmacovigilance system adheres to the stringent requirements of the relevant jurisdiction without compromising patient safety or data integrity. Careful judgment is required to balance operational efficiency with absolute regulatory compliance. The correct approach involves a phased implementation strategy that prioritizes validation and regulatory sign-off at each critical stage. This ensures that the system meets all specified requirements before full deployment, minimizing the risk of non-compliance and potential adverse events going unreported or mishandled. Specifically, this approach aligns with the principles of good pharmacovigilance practices, GVP modules, which emphasize robust data management, reporting, and quality control. The regulatory justification stems from the need to demonstrate to regulatory authorities e.g., EMA in the EU, FDA in the US, or MHRA in the UK, depending on the exam's specified jurisdiction, that the system is fit for purpose and capable of fulfilling all legal obligations for pharmacovigilance activities. This includes accurate and timely reporting of suspected adverse reactions, signal detection, and risk management. An incorrect approach of proceeding with full implementation without prior regulatory validation poses significant risks. This failure to obtain necessary approvals before deployment directly contravenes regulatory expectations for critical healthcare systems. It could lead to the system being deemed non-compliant, necessitating costly and time-consuming remediation efforts. Furthermore, it increases the likelihood of data inaccuracies or reporting delays, which can have severe consequences for public health and result in regulatory sanctions. Another incorrect approach, focusing solely on internal testing without engaging relevant regulatory bodies for guidance or approval, overlooks the fundamental requirement for external oversight in pharmacovigilance. While internal testing is crucial, it cannot substitute for the validation and acceptance by the governing regulatory authorities. This approach demonstrates a lack of understanding of the regulatory framework's emphasis on independent verification of systems that impact patient safety. A third incorrect approach, prioritizing speed of deployment over thorough validation, is ethically and regulatorily unsound. In the pharmaceutical industry, patient safety is paramount. Any system designed to monitor drug safety must be meticulously validated to ensure its reliability and accuracy. Rushing the implementation process without adequate checks and balances jeopardizes this core principle and exposes Teva Pharmaceutical Industries to significant legal and reputational damage. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a proactive engagement with the relevant regulatory authorities from the outset. This includes understanding their specific requirements, seeking clarification on any ambiguities, and incorporating their feedback into the implementation plan. A risk-based approach, where critical functionalities and regulatory touchpoints are identified and prioritized for validation, is essential. Furthermore, maintaining comprehensive documentation of all validation activities and communications with regulatory bodies is crucial for demonstrating compliance. Question 2. Risk assessment procedures indicate that Teva Pharmaceutical Industries is preparing for the launch of a new generic drug. While the internal timeline is aggressive, a recent internal audit has flagged potential discrepancies in the final batch release documentation compared to the initial approved dossier submitted to the relevant regulatory authority. The audit report highlights minor inconsistencies in the impurity profile data and the proposed labeling for one specific excipient. Which of the following actions should Teva Pharmaceutical Industries Regulatory Affairs Department prioritize to ensure compliance and a responsible product launch? Option A. Immediately halt the launch process and conduct a comprehensive investigation into the flagged discrepancies, engaging with the regulatory authority if necessary to clarify any ambiguities before proceeding. Option B. Submit a revised dossier to the regulatory authority detailing the discrepancies and request an expedited review for approval to proceed with the launch. Option C. Proceed with the launch as scheduled, assuming the discrepancies are minor and unlikely to impact product safety or efficacy, and address them through post-market surveillance. Option D. Expedite the final batch release by approving the documentation with a note to the quality control team to monitor the flagged excipient closely post-launch. The correct answer is A. Immediately halt the launch process and conduct a comprehensive investigation into the flagged discrepancies, engaging with the regulatory authority if necessary to clarify any ambiguities before proceeding. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the company's need for timely market entry with strict adherence to regulatory requirements designed to protect public health. The pressure to launch a new product quickly can create a temptation to overlook or downplay potential compliance issues. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all regulatory obligations are met without undue delay, demonstrating integrity and a commitment to patient safety. The correct approach involves a proactive and thorough review of all relevant regulatory submissions and documentation by Teva Pharmaceutical Industries Regulatory Affairs Team. This team must meticulously verify that all data, labeling, and manufacturing processes align precisely with the approved specifications and current good manufacturing practices, CGMP, as mandated by the relevant regulatory authority. This ensures that the product released to the market is safe, effective, and compliant, thereby upholding Teva's ethical and legal responsibilities. An incorrect approach that prioritizes speed over thoroughness by proceeding with the launch without a complete and verified regulatory dossier would be a significant ethical and regulatory failure. This bypasses the essential oversight mechanisms designed to prevent substandard or unsafe products from reaching consumers. Another incorrect approach, which involves making assumptions about regulatory approval based on previous product launches, is also flawed. Each product submission is unique and requires independent verification, and relying on past approvals without current validation is a dereliction of duty. Finally, an approach that seeks to expedite the process by submitting incomplete or preliminary data with the intention of providing full documentation later demonstrates a disregard for the integrity of the regulatory submission process and could lead to serious consequences, including product recalls and reputational damage. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and patient safety above all else. This involves establishing clear internal protocols for product launch readiness, ensuring adequate resources for the regulatory affairs team, and fostering a culture where raising compliance concerns is encouraged and addressed promptly. When faced with potential delays, the focus should be on identifying the root cause of the delay and working collaboratively with regulatory bodies to resolve issues efficiently and transparently, rather than attempting to circumvent established procedures. Question 3. When evaluating a potential deviation from manufacturing specifications for a critical component used in a Teva Pharmaceutical Industries product, what is the most appropriate course of action to ensure regulatory compliance and patient safety? Option A. Release the component for use in the final product based on the assumption that the deviation is minor and unlikely to impact efficacy or safety without a formal investigation. Option B. Immediately discard the entire batch of the component to avoid any risk, without conducting a detailed investigation into the cause of the deviation. Option C. Initiate a comprehensive root cause investigation, meticulously document all findings, and implement corrective and preventive actions in accordance with Teva Pharmaceutical Industries' quality management system, and relevant regulatory guidelines before making any decision on the affected component. Option D. Blame the deviation on external supplier issues and request a replacement without thoroughly investigating Teva Pharmaceutical Industries' internal handling and processing of the component. The correct answer is C. Initiate a comprehensive root cause investigation, meticulously document all findings, and implement corrective and preventive actions in accordance with Teva Pharmaceutical Industries' quality management system and relevant regulatory guidelines before making any decision on the affected component. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the company's need for efficient operations with the stringent regulatory requirements governing pharmaceutical manufacturing and marketing, specifically concerning product quality and patient safety. A failure to adhere to these regulations can result in significant penalties, reputational damage, and most importantly, harm to patients. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any proposed solution aligns with Teva Pharmaceutical Industries' commitment to compliance and ethical conduct. The correct approach involves a thorough review of Teva Pharmaceutical Industries' internal quality management system and relevant regulatory guidelines to identify the root cause of the deviation. This includes consulting the company's standard operating procedures, SOP, for handling out of specification, OOS, results and referencing the applicable regulatory framework, which for Teva Pharmaceutical Industries would be governed by agencies like the FDA in the US or EMA in Europe, depending on the market. The regulatory expectation is a systematic investigation, documented evidence of the investigation's findings, and implementation of corrective and preventive actions, COPPA, to prevent recurrence. This ensures that product quality is maintained and patient safety is not compromised, fulfilling the company's legal and ethical obligations. An incorrect approach would be to immediately discard the affected batch without a proper investigation. This bypasses the regulatory requirement for root cause analysis and documentation, potentially masking systemic issues within Teva Pharmaceutical Industries' manufacturing processes. It also fails to provide data that could inform future improvements, leading to a higher risk of similar deviations occurring. Another incorrect approach would be to proceed with releasing the batch based on a superficial assessment or anecdotal evidence that the deviation is minor. This directly violates the principle of ensuring product quality before release and disregards the potential for unforeseen consequences for patients. Regulatory bodies mandate rigorous testing and adherence to specifications, and any deviation from this standard is a serious compliance failure. A third incorrect approach would be to attribute the deviation solely to external factors without investigating internal processes. While external factors can contribute, a comprehensive investigation by Teva Pharmaceutical Industries must also scrutinize internal controls, equipment, personnel training, and procedures to identify any contributing internal causes. This failure to conduct a holistic investigation can lead to recurring problems and a lack of accountability. The professional decision-making process for similar situations at Teva Pharmaceutical Industries should involve a structured, risk-based approach. This begins with immediate containment of the affected product, followed by a detailed, documented investigation involving relevant quality assurance and technical personnel. The investigation must identify the root cause, assess the impact on product quality and patient safety, and implement appropriate COPPA. All actions and findings must be meticulously documented to demonstrate compliance with regulatory requirements and internal quality standards. Question 4. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a new promotional campaign for Teva Pharmaceutical Industries' latest cardiovascular drug highlights overwhelmingly positive efficacy data from a recent clinical trial. However, internal discussions reveal that the trial also identified a statistically significant, albeit manageable, increase in a specific adverse event that was not prominently featured in the initial draft of the promotional materials. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Teva team responsible for approving this campaign? Option A. Approve the promotional material as drafted, as the adverse event is manageable and the focus on efficacy is crucial for market penetration. Option B. Immediately halt the campaign and require a comprehensive review of the promotional material by Teva's medical, legal, and regulatory affairs departments to ensure fair balance and full disclosure of all relevant trial data, including adverse events. Option C. Instruct the sales team to verbally disclose the adverse event during their presentations to healthcare professionals, while proceeding with the current promotional material. Option D. Proceed with the campaign, but instruct the marketing team to subtly adjust the language to acknowledge potential side effects without explicitly detailing the specific adverse event. The correct answer is A. Approve the promotional material as drafted, as the adverse event is manageable and the focus on efficacy is crucial for market penetration. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Teva Pharmaceutical Industries employees due to the inherent conflict between commercial pressures and regulatory compliance, particularly concerning the promotion of prescription drugs. The need to balance sales targets with the ethical and legal obligation to provide accurate, balanced, and non-misleading information to healthcare professionals is paramount. Misrepresenting clinical trial data, even if unintentional due to selective emphasis, can lead to inappropriate prescribing decisions, patient harm, and significant legal and reputational damage for Teva. Therefore, careful judgment and a robust understanding of regulatory guidelines are essential. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the promotional material by the medical and legal departments to ensure it accurately reflects the full scope of the clinical trial data, including any limitations or adverse events, and complies with all applicable regulations. This ensures that healthcare professionals receive a balanced and complete picture, enabling them to make informed prescribing decisions. This approach is justified by regulatory frameworks that mandate truthful and non-misleading promotion of pharmaceutical products. Specifically, regulations typically require that promotional materials present a fair balance of benefits and risks, and do not omit material information that could affect a healthcare professional's decision. Adhering to these principles protects patients and maintains the integrity of the pharmaceutical industry. An incorrect approach would be to approve the promotional material based solely on its potential to highlight positive outcomes, without a comprehensive review of the entire dataset. This fails to acknowledge the regulatory requirement for fair balance, and can lead to the omission of crucial information regarding side effects or limitations of the drug's efficacy in certain patient populations. Such an omission is a direct violation of regulatory principles designed to prevent misleading promotion. Another incorrect approach would be to proceed with the promotion without any internal review, relying on the sales team's interpretation of the data. This bypasses essential quality control mechanisms and exposes Teva to significant risks. It demonstrates a disregard for established compliance procedures and the regulatory obligation to ensure promotional content is accurate and substantiated. A further incorrect approach would be to modify the presentation of the data to emphasize favorable results while downplaying or omitting less favorable ones, even if the underlying data is not fabricated. This constitutes a form of misrepresentation by omission or undue emphasis, which is a common pitfall in pharmaceutical promotion and is strictly prohibited by regulatory bodies. It undermines the principle of providing a complete and unbiased picture to healthcare professionals. The professional reasoning process for navigating such situations should involve a proactive commitment to compliance. When faced with promotional material that appears to selectively highlight data, professionals should immediately flag it for a comprehensive review. This review should involve cross-referencing the promotional claims against the full clinical study reports and adhering to established internal review processes that include medical, legal, and regulatory expertise. The decision-making framework should prioritize patient safety and regulatory adherence above commercial objectives, ensuring that all promotional activities are transparent, accurate, and fully compliant with the law. Question 5. Analysis of a new marketing campaign proposal for a Teva Pharmaceutical Industries product reveals that a proposed presentation highlights a statistically significant improvement in a secondary endpoint from a clinical trial, but omits discussion of the primary endpoint's lack of significant difference and does not explicitly reference the approved indications for which the secondary endpoint is relevant. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Teva employee responsible for reviewing this proposal? Option A. Approve the campaign as proposed, as the secondary endpoint did show a statistically significant improvement, which is a positive finding. Option B. Request a revision of the campaign to include a balanced presentation of all relevant clinical trial data, including the primary endpoint results, and a clear articulation of how all claims align with the approved product labeling and indications. Option C. Proceed with the campaign, but add a disclaimer at the end of the presentation, stating that the information is for informational purposes only and not intended for promotional use. Option D. Recommend the campaign be approved, with the understanding that the sales team will verbally clarify the nuances of the data to healthcare professionals during their interactions. The correct answer is A. Approve the campaign as proposed, as the secondary endpoint did show a statistically significant improvement, which is a positive finding. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Teva Pharmaceutical Industries employee due to the inherent conflict between commercial pressures and the stringent regulatory requirements governing pharmaceutical product promotion. The need to accurately represent product benefits while adhering to approved labeling and avoiding off-label promotion is paramount. Misrepresenting data or making unsubstantiated claims can lead to severe regulatory penalties, reputational damage, and potential harm to patients. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the clinical trial data and the approved product labeling. This ensures that any promotional materials accurately reflect the evidence supporting the product's efficacy and safety within its authorized indications. Specifically, it requires referencing the approved prescribing information and ensuring that all claims made are directly supported by this information or by robust, peer-reviewed scientific literature that aligns with the approved indications. This adheres to the principles of truthful and non-misleading promotion, a cornerstone of pharmaceutical regulation. An incorrect approach that involves selectively highlighting positive data points while downplaying or omitting negative findings or limitations would be a significant regulatory failure. This constitutes misleading promotion and violates the principle of presenting a balanced view of the product's profile. Similarly, promoting the drug for uses not approved by regulatory authorities, off-label promotion, is a serious violation. This is because the safety and efficacy of the drug have not been established for those unapproved indications, and such promotion bypasses the rigorous review process designed to protect public health. Another incorrect approach, such as relying solely on anecdotal evidence or testimonials without substantiation from clinical trials or approved labeling, fails to meet the evidentiary standards required for pharmaceutical promotion and can be misleading. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. This involves 1. Understanding the approved indications and contraindications for the product. 2. Critically evaluating all available data, both positive and negative. 3. Ensuring that all promotional claims are directly supported by the approved labeling or robust scientific evidence that aligns with the approved labeling. 4. Consulting with regulatory affairs and legal departments when in doubt about the interpretation of data or the appropriateness of a claim. 5. Maintaining a commitment to transparency and accuracy in all communications. Question 6. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a significant number of post-market adverse event reports for a Teva Pharmaceutical Industries product have been received, some of which suggest a potential for serious harm. The sales team is concerned that prompt and comprehensive reporting of these events to regulatory authorities could lead to negative publicity and impact future sales projection. Which of the following actions should Teva Pharmaceutical Industries prioritize in response to this situation? Option A. Conduct a thorough internal review of the adverse event data and implement internal risk mitigation strategies before any external reporting to regulatory authorities to present a unified and controlled response. Option B. Report only those adverse events that are clearly and unequivocally linked to the product, and delay reporting of others until further investigation can establish a definitive causal relationship. Option C. Focus on gathering more data to definitively prove causality for each adverse event before submitting any reports to regulatory authorities, to avoid premature alarm and potential negative commercial impact. Option D. Immediately compile and submit all received adverse event reports to the relevant regulatory authorities, along with a detailed internal assessment of potential causality and risk, while simultaneously initiating further internal investigation into the reported events. The correct answer is D. Immediately compile and submit all received adverse event reports to the relevant regulatory authorities, along with a detailed internal assessment of potential causality and risk, while simultaneously initiating further internal investigation into the reported events. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge for Teva Pharmaceutical Industries due to the potential conflict between commercial objectives and regulatory compliance, specifically concerning the accurate and timely reporting of adverse events. The pressure to maintain market share and meet sales targets can inadvertently lead to a situation where the significance of adverse event data is downplayed or delayed in reporting, which is a critical failure in pharmacovigilance. Careful judgment is required to ensure that patient safety and regulatory obligations take precedence over commercial pressures. The correct approach involves a proactive and transparent reporting of all identified adverse events to the relevant regulatory authorities, irrespective of their perceived severity or potential impact on product sales. This aligns with the fundamental ethical and regulatory duty of pharmaceutical companies to safeguard public health. Specifically, it adheres to the principles of good pharmacovigilance practices, GVP, which mandate the timely and accurate reporting of suspected adverse reactions. This approach demonstrates Teva's commitment to patient safety and its adherence to the stringent regulatory framework governing pharmaceutical products, thereby maintaining trust with both regulators and the public. An incorrect approach that prioritizes commercial interests over safety reporting would involve delaying or omitting the reporting of adverse events that might negatively impact sales. This constitutes a serious regulatory failure, as it violates the core tenets of pharmacovigilance and can lead to significant penalties, reputational damage, and most importantly, put patients at risk by withholding crucial safety information. Another incorrect approach might be to only report events that are definitively proven to be causally linked to the drug, ignoring potential signals or events that warrant further investigation. This is also a failure, as pharmacovigilance requires reporting of suspected adverse reactions to allow for signal detection and risk assessment by regulatory bodies. Finally, an approach that relies solely on internal review without timely external reporting, even if the internal review is thorough, is insufficient as it bypasses the regulatory requirement for immediate notification of potential safety concerns. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes patient safety and regulatory compliance above all else. This involves establishing clear internal policies and procedures for adverse event reporting, providing comprehensive training to all relevant personnel, and fostering a culture where reporting is encouraged and rewarded, not penalized. When faced with conflicting pressures, the professional must escalate concerns through appropriate channels, seeking guidance from legal and compliance departments to ensure adherence to all applicable regulations and ethical standards. Question 7. Operational review demonstrates that Teva Pharmaceutical Industries has received a report of a serious adverse event associated with one of its products. The initial report lacks some critical details regarding the patient's medical history and the exact timing of the event. The company's pharmacovigilance team is aware of the regulatory deadline for reporting such events to the relevant health authority. Which of the following actions best represents Teva's professional and regulatory obligation in this situation? Option A. Submit a report based on assumptions and preliminary interpretations of the available information to meet the deadline. Option B. Delay the submission until all missing details are definitively confirmed, even if it means exceeding the regulatory reporting deadline. Option C. Immediately submit the report with the available information, clearly noting the missing details and initiating a process to obtain them urgently. Option D. Disregard the report as incomplete and wait for further unsolicited information from the reporter. The correct answer is C. Immediately submit the report with the available information, clearly noting the missing details and initiating a process to obtain them urgently. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge for Teva Pharmaceutical Industries due to the critical nature of pharmacovigilance and the potential for significant regulatory noncompliance and patient harm. The core difficulty lies in balancing the need for timely reporting of adverse events with the requirement for accurate and complete information, all within strict regulatory timelines. Careful judgment is required to ensure that Teva upholds its commitment to patient safety and regulatory adherence. The correct approach involves a systematic and documented process for evaluating and reporting adverse events. This includes promptly acknowledging receipt of the report, conducting a thorough medical assessment to determine causality and severity, gathering all necessary information, and submitting the report to the relevant regulatory authorities within the stipulated timeframe. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the principles of pharmacovigilance, which prioritize patient safety and regulatory compliance. Specifically, it adheres to the legal and ethical obligations to monitor the safety of marketed pharmaceutical products and to inform regulatory bodies of any potential risks. This ensures that regulatory agencies have the information needed to take appropriate action to protect public health. An incorrect approach would be to delay reporting due to incomplete information without a clear plan for its timely acquisition. This is a regulatory failure because it violates the mandatory reporting timelines set by regulatory bodies. Such delays can prevent authorities from identifying and mitigating potential risks to patients, leading to a breach of ethical responsibility. Another incorrect approach would be to submit a report with deliberately omitted or misleading information. This constitutes a severe regulatory and ethical violation, as it undermines the integrity of the pharmacovigilance system and can lead to incorrect risk assessments and potentially harmful regulatory decisions. It also erodes trust between the company and regulatory authorities. A third incorrect approach would be to rely solely on anecdotal evidence without a structured medical assessment. This fails to meet the regulatory requirement for a scientifically sound evaluation of adverse events and could lead to either underreporting of serious events or unnecessary alarm over minor occurrences, both of which are detrimental to public health and regulatory compliance. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes patient safety and regulatory compliance. This involves establishing clear internal procedures for adverse event handling, ensuring adequate training for personnel, and fostering a culture of transparency and accountability. When faced with incomplete information, the framework should guide the team to actively pursue the missing data while still adhering to reporting timelines, potentially through interim submissions if permitted by regulations, clearly indicating the missing elements. Question 8. Research into Teva Pharmaceutical Industries' new marketing campaign for a recently approved medication reveals that the proposed promotional materials highlight efficacy data, but omit detailed information on potential side effects, which are considered significant by the medical community. The sales team is eager to launch the campaign to meet aggressive quarterly targets. Option A. Modify the marketing campaign to include a brief disclaimer about potential side effects without altering the primary focus on efficacy to expedite the launch. Option B. Proceed with the marketing campaign as planned, as the focus on efficacy is standard practice in pharmaceutical advertising to highlight product benefits. Option C. Halt the marketing campaign and mandate a comprehensive review of all promotional materials by Teva Pharmaceutical Industries regulatory and legal departments to ensure full compliance with all applicable pharmaceutical advertising laws and guidelines, including the clear and balanced presentation of both benefits and risks. Option D. Authorize the marketing campaign to proceed, but instruct the sales team to verbally disclose potential side effects when directly questioned by healthcare professionals. The correct answer is B. Proceed with the marketing campaign as planned, as the focus on efficacy is standard practice in pharmaceutical advertising to highlight product benefits. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's commercial interests with its ethical and regulatory obligations concerning the marketing of pharmaceutical products. The pressure to meet sales targets can create a conflict of interest, potentially leading to the temptation to misrepresent product benefits or downplay risks. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all promotional activities are compliant, accurate, and do not mislead healthcare professionals or patients. The correct approach involves a thorough review of all promotional materials by the company's regulatory and legal departments to ensure compliance with the relevant pharmaceutical advertising regulations. This process guarantees that claims made about Teva Pharmaceutical Industries products are substantiated by scientific evidence, and that all necessary risk information is clearly communicated. This aligns with the ethical imperative to provide accurate information and the legal requirement to adhere to strict advertising standards designed to protect public health. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on sales performance without adequate regulatory oversight would fail to meet these standards. This could lead to the dissemination of misleading information, potentially harming patients and exposing Teva Pharmaceutical Industries to significant legal and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes speed to market over thorough review risks, overlooking critical compliance issues, thereby violating regulatory requirements and ethical principles of transparency and patient safety. A third incorrect approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or unsubstantiated claims, rather than robust scientific data, directly contravenes the principles of evidence-based medicine and regulatory compliance for pharmaceutical promotion. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical conduct above all else. This involves understanding the specific regulations governing pharmaceutical promotion, establishing robust internal review processes, and fostering a culture where ethical considerations are paramount. When faced with commercial pressures, professionals must actively seek guidance from regulatory and legal experts and advocate for approaches that uphold both company integrity and public well-being. Question 9. The monitoring system demonstrates a recurring pattern of minor deviations in batch record documentation for a specific Teva Pharmaceutical Industries product, which have been addressed with ad hoc corrections without a formal root cause analysis. What is the most appropriate risk assessment and response strategy? Option A. Implement immediate, broad retraining for all personnel involved in batch record documentation across all Teva facilities to mitigate the risk of future deviations. Option B. Escalate the issue to senior management for a decision on whether to halt production of the affected product until the documentation issues are resolved. Option C. Continue to address each deviation individually with ad hoc corrections as they arise, assuming the cumulative impact is negligible given the minor nature of each instance. Option D. Initiate a formal investigation to identify the root cause of the recurring documentation deviations and implement a comprehensive corrective and preventive action (COPPA) plan, including process improvements and targeted training, with subsequent verification of effectiveness. The correct answer is D. Initiate a formal investigation to identify the root cause of the recurring documentation deviations and implement a comprehensive corrective and preventive action (COPPA) plan, including process improvements and targeted training, with subsequent verification of effectiveness. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Teva Pharmaceutical Industries, as a global pharmaceutical company, operates under stringent regulatory oversight. The monitoring system's findings indicate a potential deviation from established quality control procedures, which could have significant implications for product safety, efficacy, and regulatory compliance. The challenge lies in accurately assessing the severity of the deviation, understanding its root cause, and implementing an appropriate response that balances operational efficiency with the paramount need for patient safety and adherence to regulatory standards. Careful judgment is required to avoid overreacting or underreacting to the findings. The correct approach involves a thorough, documented investigation into the observed deviation. This includes gathering all relevant data, identifying the precise nature of the noncompliance, determining the root cause, and assessing the potential impact on product quality and patient safety. Following this, a corrective and preventive action (COPPA) plan must be developed and implemented, with robust follow-up to ensure its effectiveness. This approach is justified by the principles of good manufacturing practices (GMP) and the overarching regulatory framework governing pharmaceutical manufacturing, which mandate rigorous quality control and a systematic approach to addressing deviations. Specifically, regulations such as those enforced by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration (FDA) or the European Medicines Agency (EMA) require pharmaceutical companies to have robust quality management systems that include procedures for investigating deviations, implementing COPPA, and ensuring product quality. Ethical considerations also demand that patient safety be prioritized, necessitating a proactive and comprehensive response to any potential quality issue. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the findings without proper investigation, assuming they are minor or due to a temporary anomaly. This failure to investigate is a direct violation of GMP principles and regulatory requirements, which mandate that all deviations be thoroughly investigated. Such inaction could lead to the release of substandard or unsafe products, posing a serious risk to public health and resulting in severe regulatory penalties, including product recalls, fines, and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach would be to implement a superficial or reactive fix without identifying the root cause. For example, Simply retraining personnel without addressing systemic issues that led to the deviation would be insufficient. This approach fails to prevent recurrence and demonstrates a lack of commitment to a robust quality management system, again contravening regulatory expectations for effective COPPA implementation. A third incorrect approach would be to conceal or misrepresent the findings to regulatory authorities. This is not only unethical, but also constitutes a serious legal and regulatory violation, potentially leading to criminal charges and severe sanctions against both the company and individuals involved. Transparency and honesty in reporting are fundamental ethical and regulatory obligations for pharmaceutical companies. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk-based approach. First, acknowledge and document the monitoring system's findings. Second, initiate a formal investigation process, engaging relevant quality assurance and operational personnel. Third, assess the risk associated with the deviation, considering its potential impact on product quality, patient safety, and regulatory compliance. Fourth, develop and implement a COPPA plan that addresses the root cause and is designed to prevent recurrence. Fifth, monitor the effectiveness of the COPPA and report findings and actions to relevant stakeholders and, if necessary, regulatory bodies. This systematic process ensures that deviations are managed effectively, maintaining compliance and safeguarding public health. Question 10. Comparative studies suggest that pharmaceutical companies often face challenges in balancing the speed of adverse event reporting with the thoroughness of internal investigations. For Teva Pharmaceutical Industries, what is the most compliant and ethically sound approach to reporting a serious adverse event suspected to be related to one of its products when initial information is received and a full investigation is still underway? Option A. Immediately report the serious adverse event to the relevant regulatory authority upon initial receipt and assessment of sufficient information to suggest a causal relationship, while continuing the internal investigation and submitting follow-up reports as more data becomes available. Option B. Rely exclusively on external data sources and third-party reports for adverse event information, without establishing a dedicated internal reporting and verification process. Option C. Report all suspected adverse events, regardless of seriousness or potential causality, immediately to the regulatory authority, without any prior internal assessment or verification. Option D. Delay the initial report to the regulatory authority until the internal investigation is fully completed and a definitive causal link between the product and the adverse event is established. The correct answer is A. Immediately report the serious adverse event to the relevant regulatory authority upon initial receipt and assessment of sufficient information to suggest a causal relationship, while continuing the internal investigation and submitting follow-up reports as more data becomes available. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a challenge for Teva Pharmaceutical Industries in navigating the complex landscape of pharmacovigilance reporting, specifically concerning adverse event AE reporting timelines. The core difficulty lies in balancing the imperative to report serious adverse events promptly to regulatory authorities with the need for thorough internal investigation and data verification. Delays in reporting can lead to regulatory scrutiny, fines, and potential harm to patients if critical safety information is not disseminated in a timely manner. Conversely, premature or inaccurate reporting can also have negative consequences, including misinterpretation of safety data and unnecessary alarm. Therefore, a robust internal process that ensures both speed and accuracy is paramount. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves establishing and adhering to a clear internal protocol for AE reporting that aligns with regulatory requirements. This protocol should define what constitutes a reportable AE, the criteria for seriousness, and the specific timelines for submission to regulatory bodies. Crucially, it must also outline the internal investigation process, including the roles and responsibilities of different departments, e.g., medical affairs, regulatory affairs, quality assurance, in gathering, assessing, and verifying AE data. The emphasis on immediate notification to the regulatory authority upon identification of a reportable serious adverse event, followed by the submission of detailed follow-up reports as information becomes available, is the standard practice mandated by pharmacovigilance regulations. This ensures that regulatory bodies are informed of potential safety signals as quickly as possible, while allowing for the subsequent provision of comprehensive data. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves delaying the initial report to the regulatory authority until a complete internal investigation is finalized and all potential causal links are definitively established. This fails to meet the regulatory requirement for prompt reporting of serious adverse events, which often have a defined reporting window, e.g., 15 days for serious suspected adverse reactions in many jurisdictions. Regulatory expectation is to report based on a reasonable suspicion of a causal relationship, not absolute certainty. Another incorrect approach is to report all suspected adverse events, regardless of seriousness or potential causality, immediately without any internal assessment or verification. This can lead to an overwhelming volume of data for regulatory authorities, potentially obscuring genuine safety signals and indicating a lack of robust internal quality control processes. It also risks misallocating resources and generating unnecessary concern. A third incorrect approach is to rely solely on external data sources or third-party reports without establishing a clear internal process for AE collection, assessment, and reporting. While external data is valuable, Teva, as the marketing authorization holder, has a direct regulatory obligation to ensure accurate and timely reporting of adverse events associated with its products. Professional reasoning. Professionals at Teva Pharmaceutical Industries should adopt a proactive and systematic approach to pharmacovigilance. This involves 1. Understanding and internalizing all relevant regulatory requirements for AE reporting, including specific timelines and definitions of reportable events. 2. Implementing and rigorously following a well-documented internal SOP for AE management, from initial receipt to final reporting. 3. Fostering cross-functional collaboration between departments involved in AE handling to ensure efficient information flow and timely decision-making. 4. Prioritizing patient safety by ensuring that potential safety signals are communicated to regulatory authorities without undue delay, while simultaneously conducting thorough investigations. 5. Regularly reviewing and updating internal processes to align with evolving regulatory expectations and scientific understanding. Question 11. The efficiency study reveals that certain manufacturing steps at Teva Pharmaceutical Industries could be streamlined to reduce production time and costs. However, these proposed changes involve modifications to existing validated processes. Which of the following approaches best ensures that Teva maintains its commitment to regulatory compliance and product quality? Option A. Proceed with the efficiency improvements that offer the most significant cost savings, assuming that minor process adjustments will not affect product quality or regulatory standing. Option B. Implement the efficiency changes immediately to gain a competitive advantage and address any potential regulatory concerns that may arise retrospectively. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive regulatory impact assessment for each proposed change, ensuring all modifications are evaluated against current good manufacturing practices, CGMP, and relevant regional pharmaceutical regulations before implementation. Option D. Rely on the historical compliance record of the existing processes and implement efficiency measures, without a specific review of their impact on current regulatory requirements. The correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive regulatory impact assessment for each proposed change, ensuring all modifications are evaluated against current good manufacturing practices, CGMP, and relevant regional pharmaceutical regulations before implementation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Teva Pharmaceutical Industries, as a global entity, must navigate complex regulatory landscapes. The efficiency study's findings, if not handled with due diligence, could lead to non-compliance with pharmaceutical manufacturing standards, impacting product quality, patient safety, and the company's reputation. The core challenge lies in balancing the drive for operational efficiency with the absolute imperative of adhering to stringent regulatory requirements. Careful judgment is required to identify and implement changes that enhance efficiency without compromising safety or compliance. The correct approach involves a thorough impact assessment that prioritizes regulatory compliance. This means meticulously evaluating how any proposed efficiency improvements might affect Teva's adherence to the specific regulatory framework governing its operations. This approach is correct because it proactively identifies potential compliance risks before changes are implemented. It ensures that all modifications are assessed against relevant laws, guidelines, and internal quality standards, thereby safeguarding against regulatory violations, product recalls, and potential legal repercussions. This aligns with the ethical responsibility of pharmaceutical companies to ensure the safety and efficacy of their products. An incorrect approach would be to implement efficiency changes based solely on cost reduction or speed without a formal regulatory impact assessment. This is professionally unacceptable because it disregards the fundamental principle of patient safety and regulatory adherence, which are paramount in the pharmaceutical industry. Such an approach risks introducing manufacturing defects, compromising product integrity, and failing to meet the standards set by regulatory bodies. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that existing processes are inherently compliant and therefore do not require reevaluation in light of efficiency initiatives. This is flawed, as process changes, even those intended to be beneficial, can inadvertently create new compliance gaps. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the regulatory environment. When faced with efficiency proposals, the first step is to identify all applicable regulations and guidelines. Subsequently, a systematic impact assessment should be conducted for each proposed change, evaluating its potential effects on product quality, manufacturing processes, data integrity, and overall compliance. This assessment should involve relevant quality assurance and regulatory affairs personnel. Decisions should then be made based on the findings of this assessment, prioritizing compliance and patient safety above all else. Question 12. Regulatory review indicates that Teva Pharmaceutical Industries is considering a modification to the excipient profile of an established oral solid dosage form. This change is intended to improve tablet compressibility during manufacturing. What is the most appropriate approach for Teva to ensure compliance with regulatory requirements in the United States? Option A. Implement the change immediately to improve manufacturing efficiency and inform the FDA of the modification in the next annual report. Option B. Proceed with the change assuming it is a minor formulation adjustment that does not require any regulatory notification or approval, as it does not alter the active pharmaceutical ingredient. Option C. Initiate the change and simultaneously submit a new drug application, NDA, for the modified product, treating it as a completely new entity. Option D. Conduct a thorough regulatory impact assessment to determine if the change constitutes a major or minor modification requiring specific FDA filings, and engage with the FDA if necessary, based on the assessment's findings. The correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough regulatory impact assessment to determine if the change constitutes a major or minor modification requiring specific FDA filings, and engage with the FDA if necessary, based on the assessment's findings. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between a company's desire to innovate and bring new products to market and the stringent regulatory requirements designed to ensure patient safety and product efficacy. Teva Pharmaceutical Industries, as a global pharmaceutical company, must navigate complex regulatory landscapes. The challenge lies in accurately assessing the impact of a proposed change on an existing product's regulatory status and ensuring all necessary approvals are obtained before implementation, thereby avoiding significant compliance risks and potential market disruptions. The correct approach involves a comprehensive regulatory impact assessment that meticulously evaluates how the proposed change affects the product's approved labeling, manufacturing processes, and quality control measures. This assessment must be grounded in the specific regulatory framework applicable to Teva's operations in the relevant jurisdiction. By proactively identifying all potential regulatory implications and engaging with the relevant health authorities early, Teva can ensure a compliant and efficient path to market for the modified product. This aligns with the ethical obligation to maintain product integrity and patient safety, and the regulatory imperative to adhere to approved specifications. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the change based on an assumption that it is minor and does not require significant regulatory scrutiny. This overlooks the principle that even seemingly small modifications can have substantial downstream effects on product quality, safety, or efficacy, and thus trigger new regulatory obligations. Another incorrect approach would be to delay the regulatory submission process until after the change has been implemented. This is a direct violation of regulatory requirements, which typically mandate pre-approval for significant changes, and exposes Teva to severe penalties, including product recalls, fines, and reputational damage. Finally, relying solely on internal expertise without consulting the specific regulatory guidance for the jurisdiction would be a critical failure, as it risks misinterpreting or overlooking crucial regulatory requirements. Professionals should adopt a proactive and systematic approach to regulatory impact assessment. This involves establishing clear internal procedures for evaluating proposed changes, maintaining up-to-date knowledge of relevant regulations, and fostering open communication with regulatory affairs departments and health authorities. The decision-making process should prioritize patient safety and regulatory compliance above all else, ensuring that any proposed change is thoroughly vetted for its impact on these critical areas before implementation. Question 13. Consider a scenario where a Teva pharmaceutical industry sales representative is meeting with a physician to discuss a new prescription drug. The physician expresses concern that a particular patient might benefit from this drug for a condition not explicitly listed in the approved indications. The physician asks if the sales representative can provide the patient with a sample of the drug and discuss its potential benefits for their off-label use. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Teva pharmaceutical industry sales representative? Option A. Decline to provide a sample to the patient and explain to the physician that discussing potential benefits for off-label use is not permissible, while offering to provide approved prescribing information for the drug's indicated uses. Option B. Provide the patient with a sample of the drug and discuss its potential benefits for the off-label condition, emphasizing that the physician believes it may be helpful. Option C. Provide the physician with a sample to give to the patient and suggest the physician discuss the drug's potential benefits for the off-label condition, while also mentioning that Teva has conducted some internal research on this specific use. Option D. Inform the physician that while samples cannot be given directly to patients, the physician can prescribe the drug for the off-label use if they deem it appropriate, and the sales representative can provide literature on the drug's general properties. The correct answer is B. Provide the patient with a sample of the drug and discuss its potential benefits for the off-label condition, emphasizing that the physician believes it may be helpful. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Teva Pharmaceutical Industries employee due to the inherent conflict between commercial pressures and regulatory compliance, particularly concerning the promotion of prescription drugs. The need for accurate and balanced information is paramount to ensure patient safety and uphold ethical marketing standards. Careful judgment is required to navigate these competing interests. The correct approach involves adhering strictly to Teva's internal policies and the relevant regulatory framework, which mandates that promotional materials for prescription drugs are directed solely at healthcare professionals and contain only approved information. This approach is right because it prioritizes patient well-being and legal compliance. Specifically, it aligns with the principles of pharmaceutical marketing regulations that aim to prevent off-label promotion and ensure that healthcare providers receive scientifically accurate and balanced information to make informed prescribing decisions. This safeguards against misleading claims and potential harm to patients. An incorrect approach would be to provide samples of a prescription drug to a patient directly, even if requested. This is a regulatory failure because it bypasses the healthcare professional, who is the intended recipient of such promotional materials and is responsible for patient care and appropriate prescription. It also violates the principle of only promoting prescription drugs to those authorized to prescribe them. Another incorrect approach would be to discuss the potential benefits of the drug with a patient without also presenting the approved risk information and contraindications. This constitutes a failure to provide balanced information, which is a core ethical and regulatory requirement in pharmaceutical promotion. It can lead to a skewed perception of the drug's safety and efficacy, potentially influencing patient decisions without full understanding. A further incorrect approach would be to suggest to a patient that the drug might be effective for a condition for which it has not been approved by regulatory authorities. This is considered off-label promotion, a serious regulatory violation that can have significant legal and ethical consequences, as it exposes patients to unproven risks and undermines the established drug approval process. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the core regulatory and ethical obligations. This involves consulting Teva's comprehensive compliance policies and relevant pharmaceutical marketing laws. The next step is to assess the proposed action against these guidelines. If there is any ambiguity or potential for non-compliance, the professional should seek guidance from their compliance department or legal counsel. Prioritizing patient safety and regulatory adherence over immediate commercial objectives is a fundamental principle of responsible pharmaceutical marketing. Question 14. Market research demonstrates a significant unmet need for a new therapeutic agent in a specific disease area, and Teva Pharmaceutical Industries is preparing to launch a novel drug. The marketing team proposes an aggressive promotional campaign emphasizing the drug's superior efficacy and rapid onset of action, with the goal of capturing substantial market share within the first year. However, preliminary internal discussions reveal that while the drug's efficacy is well established, its side effect profile, though manageable, is more complex than that of existing treatments, and long-term data is still accumulating. Which of the following approaches best aligns with Teva's regulatory obligations and professional responsibilities? Option A. Develop promotional materials that highlight the drug's efficacy and rapid onset of action, but ensure that all potential risks, contraindications, and necessary precautions are presented with equal prominence and clarity, supported by robust scientific evidence, and undergo rigorous review by Teva's regulatory and legal departments. Option B. Proceed with the aggressive promotional campaign as proposed, focusing on the drug's efficacy and speed of action, with a brief mention of potential side effects in the fine print of promotional materials. Option C. Focus the promotional campaign solely on the unmet medical need and the drug's potential to address it, without making direct comparative claims or detailed efficacy statements, to minimize regulatory scrutiny. Option D. Delay the launch until comprehensive long-term data on the drug's safety and efficacy is available, to avoid any potential misrepresentation of its benefits. Correct answer is B. Proceed with the aggressive promotional campaign as proposed, focusing on the drug's efficacy and speed of action, with a brief mention of potential side effects in the fine print of promotional materials. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Teva Pharmaceutical Industries due to the inherent tension between aggressive market penetration and the stringent regulatory requirements governing pharmaceutical advertising and promotion. The company must navigate a complex landscape where claims made in marketing materials are subject to rigorous scrutiny by regulatory bodies to ensure accuracy, prevent misleading information, and protect public health. The need to gain market share quickly can create pressure to highlight benefits prominently, potentially overshadowing necessary disclosures or qualifications. Careful judgment is required to balance commercial objectives with ethical responsibilities and legal compliance. The correct approach involves a thorough review of all marketing materials by Teva's regulatory affairs and legal departments to ensure strict adherence to the relevant regulatory framework. This includes verifying that all claims are substantiated by robust scientific evidence, that comparative claims are fair and balanced, and that all necessary risk information and contraindications are clearly and conspicuously presented. This approach is the most professionally sound because it directly addresses the core regulatory obligation to provide truthful and non-misleading information to healthcare professionals and consumers. It aligns with the principles of responsible promotion, safeguarding patient safety, and maintaining the integrity of the pharmaceutical industry. Adherence to these standards is mandated by regulatory bodies to prevent harm and ensure informed decision-making. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on highlighting the perceived advantages of the new drug without adequately disclosing potential risks or limitations would be professionally unacceptable. This failure would violate regulatory requirements that mandate comprehensive risk-benefit communication. Another incorrect approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or unsubstantiated claims to promote the drug would also be a significant ethical and regulatory breach. Such practices undermine scientific integrity and can lead to inappropriate prescribing or patient use, potentially causing harm. Furthermore, an approach that bypasses internal regulatory review processes to expedite market entry would demonstrate a disregard for established compliance procedures, increasing the likelihood of regulatory violations and reputational damage. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. This involves 1. Understanding the specific regulatory requirements for pharmaceutical promotion in the relevant jurisdiction. 2. Conducting a comprehensive risk assessment of all marketing claims and materials. 3. Seeking input and approval from internal regulatory, legal, and medical affairs teams. 4. Ensuring that all promotional materials are balanced, accurate, and supported by scientific data. 5. Establishing clear internal processes for review and approval of all external communications. This systematic approach ensures that commercial objectives are pursued within the bounds of legal and ethical obligations. Question 15. The investigation demonstrates that Teva Pharmaceutical Industries is exploring opportunities to streamline its tablet manufacturing process to improve throughput and reduce operational costs. Several proposals have been put forward, including the adoption of a new granulation technique and the implementation of a real-time release testing (RTRT) system. However, the company must ensure that any changes strictly adhere to the established regulatory framework governing pharmaceutical manufacturing. Which of the following approaches best balances process optimization with regulatory compliance for Teva Pharmaceutical Industries? Option A. Prioritize the implementation of the RTRT system immediately to gain efficiency, deferring detailed validation of the granulation technique until after initial deployment. Option B. Focus solely on reducing raw material costs through alternative sourcing, assuming this will indirectly optimize the overall manufacturing process without requiring significant process changes. Option C. Proceed with the new granulation technique without extensive validation, relying on historical batch data to infer process consistency and compliance. Option D. Implement the new granulation technique, an RTRT system, after conducting thorough process validation studies and obtaining necessary regulatory approvals for the changes. The correct answer is D. Implement the new granulation technique and RTRT system after conducting thorough process validation studies and obtaining necessary regulatory approvals for the changes. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Teva Pharmaceutical Industries by requiring a strategic decision on process optimization within a highly regulated environment. The core difficulty lies in balancing the pursuit of efficiency gains with the absolute imperative of maintaining compliance with stringent pharmaceutical regulations. Any optimization must not compromise product quality, patient safety, or data integrity, all of which are subject to rigorous oversight. Careful judgment is required to identify improvements that are both beneficial and compliant. The correct approach involves a systematic, data-driven evaluation of potential process changes, prioritizing those that demonstrably enhance efficiency without introducing new risks or violating existing regulatory standards. This includes thorough validation of any modified process steps to ensure they consistently produce a product meeting all predefined quality attributes. Regulatory justification stems from the fundamental principles of good manufacturing practices, GMP, which mandate that manufacturing processes be well-defined, controlled, and validated to ensure product quality and patient safety. Adherence to these principles is non-negotiable and forms the bedrock of regulatory compliance in the pharmaceutical industry. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without adequate risk assessment and validation would be professionally unacceptable. This failure would violate GMP principles by potentially introducing variability or defects into the manufacturing process, thereby jeopardizing product quality and patient safety. Another incorrect approach that bypasses established change control procedures would be a significant regulatory failure. Such actions undermine the integrity of the validated state of the process and can lead to serious compliance issues, including product recalls and regulatory sanctions. Furthermore, an approach that neglects to consider the impact of optimization on data integrity would also be flawed, as accurate and reliable data is crucial for demonstrating ongoing compliance and for any future regulatory submissions or inspections. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the current process and its regulatory requirements. This should be followed by a comprehensive risk assessment of any proposed optimization, considering potential impacts on quality, safety, and compliance. Any changes must then undergo rigorous validation and be managed through a formal change control process. Continuous monitoring and post-implementation review are also essential to ensure the sustained effectiveness and compliance of the optimized process. Question 16. The analysis reveals that a regional sales manager for Teva Pharmaceutical Industries is under significant pressure from senior management to increase market share for a particular drug. During a meeting with key opinion leaders, the sales manager is tempted to highlight potential benefits of the drug for a condition that is not currently an approved indication, believing this could lead to increased prescriptions and help meet their targets. The sales manager is aware that this off-label use has some preliminary research supporting it, but it has not undergone formal regulatory review or approval for this specific indication. Which of the following represents the most appropriate and compliant course of action for the Teva Pharmaceutical Industries sales manager in this situation? Option A. Focus exclusively on the approved indications and established benefits of the drug, adhering strictly to the product's approved labeling and promotional guidelines. Option B. Discuss the potential benefits for the unapproved indication, emphasizing that it is based on emerging research and not officially approved, to inform healthcare professionals' understanding. Option C. Share unpublished internal research data with key opinion leaders that suggests efficacy for the unapproved indication, encouraging them to consider it in their practice. Option D. Suggest to healthcare professionals that they explore the possibility of using the drug for the unapproved condition based on anecdotal evidence and their own clinical judgment. Correct answer is B. Discuss the potential benefits for the unapproved indication, emphasizing that it is based on emerging research and not officially approved, to inform healthcare professionals' understanding. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Teva Pharmaceutical Industries employees due to the inherent conflict between commercial objectives and regulatory compliance, particularly concerning the promotion of pharmaceutical products. The need for careful judgment arises from the potential for misrepresentation or off-label promotion, which can have serious consequences for patient safety, public trust, and the company's legal standing. The correct approach involves strictly adhering to Teva's internal policies and the relevant regulatory framework governing pharmaceutical promotion. This means ensuring all promotional materials and activities are scientifically accurate, balanced, and only discuss approved indications for Teva's products. This approach is professionally sound because it directly aligns with the ethical imperative to protect public health and maintain the integrity of pharmaceutical marketing. Regulatory bodies, such as the FDA in the U.S., have stringent guidelines, e.g., Prescription Drug Advertising Act, that prohibit off-label promotion and require fair balance in advertising, detailing both benefits and risks. Adhering to these regulations safeguards Teva from significant penalties, reputational damage, and legal liabilities, while upholding patient well-being. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on meeting sales targets without regard for regulatory constraints is professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from prioritizing commercial gain over patient safety and legal obligations. Such an approach risks violating regulations that mandate truthful and non-misleading promotion, potentially leading to severe penalties, product recalls, and a loss of market trust. Another incorrect approach that involves subtly implying benefits for unapproved uses, even without explicit claims, is also professionally flawed. This circumvents the spirit, if not the letter, of the law. Regulatory bodies scrutinize promotional activities for any suggestion of off-label efficacy. This approach demonstrates a lack of integrity and a willingness to engage in deceptive practices, which can lead to significant legal repercussions and damage Teva's reputation as a responsible pharmaceutical company. A third incorrect approach that involves relying on anecdotal evidence or testimonials from healthcare professionals for unapproved uses, without proper substantiation or regulatory approval, is equally problematic. This bypasses the rigorous scientific and regulatory review process required for drug approval and promotion. It exposes patients to unproven treatments and exposes Teva to significant legal and ethical risks. The professional decision-making process for such situations should involve a clear understanding of Teva's compliance policies and the applicable regulatory landscape. When faced with pressure to promote products in ways that might be questionable, professionals should 1. Consult Teva's compliance department or legal counsel to clarify any ambiguities. 2. Prioritize patient safety and regulatory adherence above all else. 3. Document all communications and decisions related to promotional activities. 4. Refuse to engage in any activity that could be construed as off-label promotion or misrepresentation. Question 17. The performance metrics show a consistent trend of increased batch rejection rates for a key Teva Pharmaceutical Industries product manufactured at its European facility. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the Quality Assurance Department? Option A. Document the trend in the internal quality log and monitor it for further changes over the next quarter. Option B. Initiate a comprehensive root cause analysis involving cross-functional teams and review all relevant documentation and processes related to the affected product batch manufacturing. Option C. Escalate the issue to senior management for a decision on whether to halt production of the product. Option D. Temporarily increase the final product testing frequency to catch any potential quality issues before release. Correct answer is B. Initiate a comprehensive root cause analysis involving cross-functional teams and review all relevant documentation and processes related to the affected product batch manufacturing. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Teva Pharmaceutical Industries, as a global pharmaceutical company, operates under stringent regulatory oversight. The performance metrics, if indicating potential noncompliance with good manufacturing practices, GMP, or other relevant regulations, require immediate and thorough investigation. Failure to address such indicators promptly can lead to significant consequences, including product recalls, regulatory sanctions, reputational damage, and potential harm to patients. The challenge lies in balancing the need for operational efficiency with the absolute imperative of regulatory adherence and patient safety. The correct approach involves a proactive and systematic investigation into the root causes of the performance metric deviations. This entails engaging relevant internal departments, such as quality assurance and regulatory affairs, and potentially external experts if necessary. The justification for this approach is rooted in the fundamental principles of pharmaceutical regulation, which mandate that manufacturers maintain robust quality systems and ensure that their products consistently meet established quality standards. Specifically, regulations like those enforced by the FDA in the U.S., assuming this is the relevant jurisdiction for the assessment, require a thorough investigation of any deviation from established processes or specifications. This ensures that any identified issues are corrected and preventative measures are implemented to avoid recurrence, thereby safeguarding product quality and patient safety. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the performance metric deviations as minor operational fluctuations without proper investigation. This is a regulatory failure because it demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the potential implications of such deviations on product quality and compliance. It suggests a culture that prioritizes output over adherence to quality standards, which is contrary to the principles of GMP. Another incorrect approach would be to implement superficial corrective actions that do not address the underlying root cause. This is ethically problematic as it creates a false sense of compliance while leaving the potential for future noncompliance and patient risk unaddressed. It also fails to meet the regulatory requirement for effective corrective and preventative actions, COPPA. A third incorrect approach would be to conceal or downplay the findings from regulatory bodies. This is a severe ethical and regulatory breach, potentially leading to significant legal repercussions and loss of trust. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and patient safety above all else. This involves a commitment to transparency, thoroughness, and a proactive approach to quality management. When performance metrics indicate potential issues, the immediate step should be to initiate a formal investigation process, document all findings and actions, and ensure that any corrective measures are robust and validated. This systematic approach, guided by regulatory requirements and ethical principles, is crucial for maintaining the integrity of pharmaceutical operations and protecting public health. Question 18. To address the challenge of maintaining ethical business practices and avoiding conflicts of interest within Teva Pharmaceutical Industries, an employee discovers that a close personal friend is a key decision maker at a potential vendor company. The employee is involved in the vendor selection process. What is the most appropriate course of action for the employee to take? Option A. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to their direct manager and the company's compliance department, seeking guidance on how to proceed with the vendor selection process. Option B. Discreetly manage the vendor selection process to ensure fairness, without informing anyone about the personal relationship. Option C. Proceed with the vendor selection process as usual, confident in their ability to remain objective due to their strong personal integrity. Option D. Avoid any involvement in the vendor selection process without formally reporting the potential conflict of interest. The correct answer is A. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to their direct manager and the company's compliance department, seeking guidance on how to proceed with the vendor selection process. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Teva Pharmaceutical Industries employees by requiring them to navigate potential conflicts of interest that could compromise ethical conduct and regulatory compliance. The core difficulty lies in balancing personal relationships with professional responsibilities, ensuring that decisions are made in the best interest of the company and its stakeholders, rather than being influenced by personal gain or obligation. This requires a high degree of integrity and adherence to established policies. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a proactive and transparent disclosure of the potential conflict of interest to the appropriate internal authority, such as the compliance department or a designated manager. This aligns with Teva Pharmaceutical Industries' commitment to ethical business practices and regulatory adherence, as mandated by frameworks like the U.S. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, FCPA, and internal company codes of conduct. Prompt disclosure allows the company to assess the situation, implement necessary safeguards, and ensure that all interactions remain compliant and free from undue influence. This demonstrates a commitment to integrity and good corporate governance. Incorrect approaches analysis. Failing to disclose the relationship and proceeding with business interactions creates a significant risk of actual or perceived impropriety. This approach violates ethical principles by hiding potential bias and can lead to regulatory scrutiny and penalties under laws like the FCPA, which prohibits bribery and requires accurate record-keeping. Attempting to manage the conflict independently without disclosure, by assuming personal integrity is sufficient, is also professionally unsound. While personal integrity is important, it does not negate the need for organizational oversight and established procedures designed to prevent conflicts of interest. This approach bypasses necessary checks and balances, leaving the company vulnerable to ethical breaches and regulatory noncompliance. Ignoring the relationship and continuing as if it does not exist is the most egregious failure. This demonstrates a lack of awareness or disregard for ethical obligations and company policy. It creates an environment where decisions can be compromised, potentially leading to significant financial, reputational, and legal damage for Teva Pharmaceutical Industries. Professional reasoning. Professionals at Teva Pharmaceutical Industries should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency, adherence to policy, and ethical conduct. When faced with a potential conflict of interest, the immediate step should be to consult the company's conflict of interest policy. This policy will outline the specific procedures for disclosure and management. The professional should then proactively disclose the situation to their supervisor or the compliance department, providing all relevant details. This allows for an informed assessment and guidance on how to proceed, ensuring that all actions are compliant and ethically sound. This proactive approach safeguards both the individual and the company. Question 19. The review process indicates that a significant number of data points in a phase III clinical trial for a new Teva Pharmaceutical Industries drug appear to be inconsistently recorded, potentially impacting the drug's efficacy and safety profile. The submission deadline for the new drug application, NDA, is rapidly approaching. Which of the following actions best upholds regulatory compliance and ethical standards for Teva Pharmaceutical Industries? Option A. Immediately escalate the findings to the Regulatory Affairs Department and the Internal Quality Assurance Team for a comprehensive investigation and remediation plan, while temporarily halting further data integration into the NDA submission until the discrepancies are resolved. Option B. Directly contact the principal investigator of the trial site to discuss the discrepancies and request immediate corrections without involving internal oversight bodies. Option C. Advise the project team to overlook the inconsistencies in the data to ensure the timely submission of the NDA, as the potential impact is speculative. Option D. Proceed with the NDA submission as planned, assuming the discrepancies are minor and unlikely to affect the overall conclusion of the trial, to meet the critical submission deadline. Correct answer is A. Immediately escalate the findings to the Regulatory Affairs Department and the Internal Quality Assurance Team for a comprehensive investigation and remediation plan, while temporarily halting further data integration into the NDA submission until the discrepancies are resolved. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between commercial interests and the ethical obligation to ensure the integrity of clinical trial data. Teva Pharmaceutical Industries, as a global pharmaceutical company, operates under stringent regulatory oversight, particularly concerning the conduct of clinical trials. The pressure to expedite the approval process for a new drug can create an environment where shortcuts or questionable practices might be considered. However, maintaining the highest ethical standards and adhering strictly to regulatory frameworks is paramount to patient safety, public trust, and the long-term viability of the company. Careful judgment is required to navigate these pressures and uphold regulatory compliance. The correct approach involves a thorough and independent review of the data, focusing on identifying any discrepancies or anomalies that could compromise the trial's integrity, and then reporting these findings through established internal channels for investigation and remediation. This approach aligns with the principles of good clinical practice, GCP, and the regulatory requirements of agencies like the FDA, assuming a U.S. jurisdiction for this assessment. Specifically, it upholds the ethical duty to protect trial participants and ensure that the data submitted for regulatory review is accurate, complete, and verifiable. Reporting through established channels ensures that the issue is addressed systematically and transparently, allowing for appropriate corrective actions and preventing potential harm. An incorrect approach that involves overlooking or downplaying the identified discrepancies to expedite the submission process would be a severe regulatory and ethical failure. This would violate the fundamental principles of data integrity and could lead to the approval of a drug based on flawed evidence, potentially endangering patients. Another incorrect approach, such as directly confronting the principal investigator without involving the appropriate internal oversight bodies, could lead to an incomplete or biased investigation, potentially damaging professional relationships without resolving the core issue of data integrity. Furthermore, it bypasses the established procedures designed to ensure a fair and thorough review. A third incorrect approach, which is to ignore the findings altogether due to time constraints, represents a dereliction of professional duty and a direct contravention of regulatory obligations to report any potential issues that could affect the validity of the trial. Professionals in such situations should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. This involves first recognizing the potential seriousness of any data anomalies. Second, they must consult and adhere to the company's internal standard operating procedures, SOP, for handling data integrity issues and reporting adverse findings. Third, they should seek guidance from their direct supervisor or the designated compliance/quality assurance department. Finally, they must be prepared to document all actions taken and communicate findings transparently and factually, ensuring that the integrity of the clinical trial and the safety of potential patients remain the foremost considerations. Question 20. What factors determine the appropriateness of promotional claims made by Teva Pharmaceutical Industries for its prescription medications within the United States regulatory framework? Option A. The perceived effectiveness of the claims in driving sales and market share compared to competitor products. Option B. The speed at which marketing materials can be approved and disseminated to healthcare providers. Option C. The extent to which claims are supported by robust scientific evidence and presented in a balanced manner, including all necessary risk information, in accordance with FDA regulations. Option D. The subjective opinion of the marketing team regarding the persuasiveness of the claims. The correct answer is C. The extent to which claims are supported by robust scientific evidence and presented in a balanced manner, including all necessary risk information, in accordance with FDA regulations. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Teva Pharmaceutical Industries employees in navigating the complex landscape of regulatory compliance, specifically concerning the promotion of pharmaceutical products. The challenge lies in balancing the need to effectively market Teva's products with the stringent legal and ethical obligations designed to protect public health and ensure fair competition. Misinterpreting or disregarding these regulations can lead to severe consequences, including significant fines, reputational damage, and even criminal charges. Careful judgment is required to ensure all promotional activities are not only effective, but also fully compliant. The correct approach involves a thorough understanding and strict adherence to the specific promotional guidelines and advertising standards mandated by the relevant regulatory bodies for pharmaceutical products. This means ensuring all claims made about Teva's products are substantiated by robust scientific evidence, are not misleading, and are presented in a balanced manner, including appropriate risk information. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the core principles of pharmaceutical regulation, which prioritize patient safety and informed decision-making by healthcare professionals and consumers. Adherence to these guidelines is a legal requirement and an ethical imperative for any pharmaceutical company. An incorrect approach that relies solely on marketing objectives without considering regulatory constraints is professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for the legal framework governing pharmaceutical promotion, which is designed to prevent deceptive practices and protect public health. Such an approach risks making unsubstantiated claims or omitting crucial safety information, directly violating regulatory statutes and ethical codes. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes competitor analysis over regulatory compliance is also professionally flawed. While understanding the competitive landscape is important for business strategy, it must never supersede the legal and ethical obligations to comply with pharmaceutical advertising regulations. Focusing on what competitors are doing without verifying their compliance or ensuring Teva's own activities meet the required standards is a recipe for regulatory violation. Finally, an approach that assumes marketing materials are compliant simply because they have been internally reviewed without specific regulatory scrutiny is dangerous. Internal reviews may not possess the specialized knowledge of current pharmaceutical regulations or the rigorous standards required by regulatory agencies. This can lead to the inadvertent dissemination of non-compliant promotional content, exposing Teva to significant risks. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a multifaceted approach. First, a comprehensive understanding of all applicable pharmaceutical advertising regulations. Second, rigorous scientific substantiation for all claims. Third, a balanced presentation of benefits and risks. And fourth, a mandatory review by regulatory affairs or legal counsel specializing in pharmaceutical promotion before any material is disseminated. This ensures that marketing efforts are both effective and legally sound.